In the sprawling city of Fairbridge, there was no place that buzzed quite like St. Vincent's Hospital. From the outside, it looked like a beacon of hope, gleaming windows reflecting the sun, ambulances whirring in and out, and a steady stream of patients searching for expert care. Yet behind that polished exterior thrived an intricate web of relationships, hospital politics, and a deep-seated hierarchy that placed doctors on pedestals and often left everyone else struggling to keep their footing. On any given morning, one could step into the main lobby and witness the steady flood of staff, patients, and visitors. The air was a curious blend of antiseptic, freshly brewed coffee, and sometimes the tang of anxiety that accompanied any major medical facility. Nurses, in colorful scrubs, wheeled supply carts through hallways, calling out greetings to one another or checking off items on digital tablets. Doctors in crisp white coats strode briskly, dictating notes into handheld devices, and surgical interns rushed about with the wide-eyed alertness of people who hadn't slept in days. This was St. Vincent's, in all its frenetic glory, a place where life and death decisions were made daily, yet where a certain routine had settled over the staff like an ever-present hum. In the midst of it all stood a woman wearing simple navy blue scrubs, calmly checking on patients and speaking softly with their family members. Her name was Tara Lawson, and she had chosen these scrubs deliberately so that she might blend in, to see the hospital as those on the front lines experienced it. Though most of the staff at first glance might have assumed she was just another nurse, the reality was quite different. Tara was the newly appointed Medical Director of Nursing and Allied Health Services. An official title like that carried a certain weight within the hospital's organizational chart, but Tara believed titles could also create walls. She preferred to remove those barriers, to walk among the people she led, and to observe firsthand how St. Vincent's truly operated. Her journey to such a leadership position had been anything but simple. Tara had grown up in a low-income neighborhood on the south side of Fairbridge, a place where sirens often replaced lullabies, and children played in the streets under flickering streetlights because playgrounds were a luxury not afforded by the city's budget. Her mother worked 2 grueling jobs to keep a roof over their heads. She cleaned office buildings at night and served as a part-time cashier at a local grocery store during the day. Tara's father had left when she was still young, his absence leaving an invisible scar that shaped her determination to forge her own path. Amid these hardships, Tara had discovered 2 guiding lights, her intellect and her empathy. She devoured books from the local library, spending hours reading everything from classic literature to medical journals. That thirst for knowledge, combined with a natural concern for others, led her toward nursing as a profession. Over the years, she rose from a dedicated floor nurse to a charge nurse, and eventually into administrative roles that allowed her to push for policy changes, staff development, and better patient care. Her appointment as medical director 3 months ago had been the culmination of years of effort, a recognition of her skill, leadership, and unwavering compassion. She could have basked in the authority her title offered, walking the halls in a suit and flaunting the badge that declared her position. Yet Tara had a different idea of leadership. She slipped into scrubs each morning and made unannounced rounds, speaking with patients and staff alike. If she wanted to understand how to improve things, she needed to see the hospital without the filters that came from people knowing they were speaking to a member of upper management. Only a handful of high-level administrators and department heads knew her true role. Everyone else assumed she was simply Nurse Tara, a conscientious woman who helped out whenever and wherever she could. On this particular Monday morning, Tara found herself in the post-operative ward on the 3rd floor. The ward was a microcosm of the entire hospital, a relentless swirl of patient check-ins, chart updates, and medical concerns that could shift from routine to emergency in the blink of an eye. She paused at the nurse's station, greeting the staff with a warm smile and scanning the whiteboard that listed each patient's name, diagnosis, and attending physician. Everything seemed to be running smoothly, though the charge nurse, an older woman named Harriet, looked a bit overwhelmed by the backlog of patient requests. Tara stepped closer, offering a quiet greeting. Harriet exhaled in relief when she saw Tara's calm expression. "Could you check on Mr. Coleman in room 328?" Harriet asked, handing over a file. "He's post-op from an appendectomy and needs his vitals monitored regularly. I'd do it myself, but half the ward seems to need something at once." "Of course. Happy to help," Tara replied, tucking the file under her arm. She walked down the hallway with a measured pace, her senses tuned to the daily cacophony, the low beeps of IV machines, the hiss of oxygen flowing through corridors, and the voices of nurses calmly reassuring anxious patients. Pushing open the door to room 328, Tara found Mr. Coleman lying in bed, eyes half-lidded from the lingering effects of anesthesia. She introduced herself and asked how he was feeling, adjusting his pillows and blankets for comfort. As she took his vitals, she noticed his heart rate was slightly elevated. She asked him a few gentle questions, trying to gauge if he was in pain or just anxious. "It's my first surgery," he mumbled. "Can't help but feel a bit nervous." Tara offered a reassuring smile. "That's perfectly normal. You're doing well so far. We'll keep an eye on you, okay?" She noted his vitals on the chart and made a mental note to return in half an hour to check again. Just as she finished, the door opened, and in walked Dr. Samuel Hughes. He was a tall man, mid-40s, with a strong jawline that gave him a perpetually stern look. He wore his authority like a second skin, known for his expertise in minimally invasive surgeries, gallbladder removals, laparoscopic procedures, and the like. He had garnered a reputation as one of St. Vincent's most skilled surgeons. Unfortunately, he had also earned infamy for his arrogance. Rumors about Dr. Hughes's background abounded in the hospital. His father and grandfather had both been renowned surgeons, major donors to St. Vincent's, who had entire wings named after them. By the time Dr. Hughes arrived, the path to success was laid out before him in gold. The praise he received from the hospital board, some of whom were longtime associates of his late father, reinforced his belief that he was untouchable. In his mind, doctors existed on a separate plane of competence, and everyone else was merely there to serve his needs and keep out of the way. That particular morning, Dr. Hughes was in an especially foul mood. A lab delay had prevented him from receiving test results he needed for a high-profile patient earlier, and now he saw what he perceived as a nurse dawdling by the bedside instead of having everything perfectly prepared for him. His lips twisted in displeasure. He cleared his throat loudly. "Nurse," he barked, his tone cold enough to send a chill through the room. "Where's the post-op chart for this patient? I've been waiting on it since I got here." Tara recognized him immediately. She had made it a point to learn the faces of prominent surgeons, especially those rumored to create a toxic environment. She kept her voice calm. "Doctor, I was just about to record his vitals. If you give me a moment, I can hand you the chart." He scowled, making no effort to hide his impatience. "I don't have a moment," he retorted. "I have 2 surgeries scheduled later today, and I need to confirm these orders. Let's not drag this out." In the corridor, a few nurses walked by and slowed their pace, curiosity getting the better of them. They exchanged concerned glances, fully aware that Tara wasn't just another nurse. The tension in the air grew thick. Tara took a steadying breath, resisting the urge to confront him about his condescending tone. She handed him the patient's chart, maintaining a neutral expression. He snatched it, scanning the pages with brisk impatience. Mr. Coleman, still on the bed, drowsy but observant, looked at Tara with raised eyebrows, as if to ask what on earth was happening. Tara offered him a small, apologetic smile, then turned her gaze back to Dr. Hughes, who was flipping through the chart as though every second in this room was a personal affront. "Next time, have it ready when I arrive," he snapped, glaring at Tara. "Nurses should anticipate the needs of the attending physicians." She felt a flicker of anger stir within her. She could have easily revealed her title, demanded his respect, and put him in his place. But she remembered why she was here incognito. She wanted to witness the unfiltered behavior of staff, especially those who were rumored to treat their colleagues poorly. So she forced her voice to remain even. "Understood, Doctor," she said simply. He swept out of the room as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving behind an awkward silence. Tara let out a small sigh, then returned her focus to Mr. Coleman. "You doing all right?" she asked, offering a reassuring pat on his blanket. The patient blinked. "I guess so," he said quietly. "Is it always like that around here?" Tara managed a gentle half-smile. "We have all sorts of personalities in a hospital," she replied diplomatically, "but you'll be in good hands, don't worry." After exiting Mr. Coleman's room, Tara headed back to the nurses' station. A couple of nurses who had witnessed the scene whispered among themselves. One of them, a Filipino nurse named Cecilia, who'd been at St. Vincent's for several years, locked eyes with Tara and sighed. "That was rough to watch," she murmured. "Are you okay?" "Some of us were hoping you'd finally give him what he deserves." Tara offered a modest shrug. "I'm fine," she said. "Let's keep the focus on patient care for now. There's a time and place for everything." Privately, her mind mulled over how to handle Dr. Hughes. She intended to keep her identity under wraps a bit longer, but his behavior demanded action sooner rather than later. Meanwhile, Dr. Hughes continued his rounds in the same brusque manner, barking orders, complaining that lab results were late, snapping at junior nurses for trivial mistakes. Those who had worked with him longest considered this routine. He was demanding, condescending, and utterly convinced of his own superiority. Usually staff members gritted their teeth and accepted it, afraid to jeopardize their jobs by speaking out. After all, Dr. Hughes was rumored to have powerful allies on the hospital's board and among its major donors. A few hours later, Tara was at the nurses' station, updating patient charts in the electronic medical record system. She overheard Dr. Hughes's voice echoed down the hallway, berating an intern for not having some test results. The staff around her felt tense. In an environment where everything was supposed to run like a well-oiled machine, Dr. Hughes's temper flared like a loose cog, generating friction wherever he went. Sure enough, he marched around the corner and spotted Tara still at the nurses' station. His lips curled in mild displeasure. "You again," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Still loitering, I see. Nurse, call the lab this instant and tell them Dr. Hughes wants those results right now, and if you can't manage that, I'll do it myself." Tara closed the EMR screen and turned to face him. She fought to keep her voice calm. "Dr. Hughes, I can certainly call, but the lab staff informed us they've had a technical glitch. They're doing everything possible." "Don't feed me excuses," he snarled. "If people did their jobs properly, we wouldn't have these issues. This hospital can't run on excuses." A hush fell over the station. Several nurses exchanged anxious glances. Tara took a breath, then rose from her seat. "Doctor, with all due respect, yelling at staff won't fix broken machinery or speed up the process," she said, her tone more resolute than before. "We should be collaborating, not intimidating." He narrowed his gaze, clearly unaccustomed to nurses talking back to him. "You have no idea what real responsibility means," he said, in a deadly hush. "I'm a surgeon on a tight schedule. If you had any sense of urgency, you'd be running to the lab, not standing here arguing with me." Tara felt an internal surge of frustration. She glanced around at the other nurses, who looked both aghast and hopeful that she might stand her ground. She decided now was the moment to escalate privately. "I think we should speak elsewhere, Doctor," she said. Without waiting for his reply, She walked down the hall to a small conference room often used for quick staff debriefings. Dr. Hughes followed, if only out of shock that this nurse would dare summon him. Once inside, Tara closed the door, muffling the low buzz of the ward outside. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Dr. Hughes's dark eyes flashed with impatience, while Tara folded her arms, her posture balanced. She was done dancing around his ego, but she also recognized the need for professionalism. "Dr. Hughes," she began softly, "I've seen how you treat the staff. It's not acceptable. Your skill as a surgeon doesn't give you the right to demean people." His mouth twitched. "Who do you think you are, telling me how to manage my department?" he snapped. "I've saved countless lives here, and I won't be lectured by someone who—" She cut him off, taking a small laminated ID badge from her pocket and placing it on the table between them. It bore her photo and the words, "Medical Director of Nursing and Allied Health Services." His eyes flicked to the ID, confusion evident on his face. "I'm Tara Lawson," she said, her voice steady. "I was appointed to this role 3 months ago. I came here in scrubs to understand our workplace culture firsthand. That's how I discovered your behavior isn't just rude. It's dangerous to teamwork and patient care." He stared, momentarily speechless. Slowly, the color drained from his cheeks as he realized the enormity of his mistake. I didn't realize," he stammered, all bluster gone. She exhaled, picking up the badge and returning it to her pocket. "No, you didn't, because you never bother to see the people around you, Dr. Hughes. You think you're above them. That attitude needs to change." He blinked several times, as though trying to compute a new reality. "Director Lawson," he said, tripping over his own words, "if you had concerns, you could have just requested a meeting. There's no need to—" She raised her hand, her tone firm, but not loud. "This is about more than a personal concern. It's about respect. I've seen how you talk to nurses, technicians, even junior doctors. Your behavior fosters fear, not collaboration. We can't allow that at St. Vincent's. It endangers patient outcomes." He looked at the closed door, perhaps wishing he could leave. "I get results," he tried to argue, voice weaker than usual. "My surgical record speaks for itself. You can ask any of my patients." "Patients need more than your surgical prowess," she countered. "They need a cohesive care team, open communication, and a hospital that values everyone's expertise. If you undermine or intimidate staff, they might hesitate to speak up when it counts, and that can harm patients." He inhaled sharply, struggling to regain his composure. "What do you want from me, Director Lawson?" Tara recognized the quiet fear behind his question. "Doctor." Hughes was accustomed to being untouchable, but here was someone who outranked him in a crucial area. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I want you to agree to staff-wide communication training. I want you to actively participate, showing the staff you're willing to change. I want you to start treating them with the basic respect they deserve. And if you slip, own up to it and apologize." He balled his fists at his sides, but then slowly released them. The fight seemed to drain out of him. "Fine," he managed. "If that's what the administration wants, I'll do it." She nodded, feeling a swirl of relief and lingering tension. "We'll formalize the plan. Until then, please watch how you address the staff. People here are dedicated, but they're not your punching bags." He said nothing more, simply turned on his heel and left. Tara let out a long breath. Confrontations like this were draining, even when necessary, but she felt that she owed it not only to herself, but to all the nurses who had suffered under his tirades without the power to stand up to him. If any hospital was to function at its best, those old authoritarian ways had to go. When news of this private meeting spread, it moved like a spark igniting dry tinder. By lunchtime, rumors were swirling in the cafeteria that Dr. Hughes had been taken down a peg by a mysterious nurse who turned out to be an administrator. Some employees were thrilled, hoping this meant real change. Others were cautious, pointing out that Dr. Hughes had powerful friends on the hospital board. But an undercurrent of optimism was unmistakable. People who'd felt voiceless now sensed they had an advocate in Tara Lawson. That afternoon, Tara spent several hours conferring with other department heads, most notably the manager of the physical therapy unit and the head pharmacist, to gather their concerns about Dr. Hughes or similar hierarchies. She also spoke with the chief operating officer, Mr. Patel, to give him a heads-up about her confrontation with Dr. Hughes. Patel, a pragmatic man, listened carefully. "I back you on this," he said. "We've had too many HR complaints about Dr. Hughes's behavior. The board values his surgical skills, but they're not blind to the toxic environment. He's been skating by on a legacy. Perhaps you can get through to him in a way no one else has." "I hope so," Tara replied, "because if he continues like this, we risk losing great nurses and staff. No one wants to work under fear, and that can affect patient outcomes." That same day, Dr. Hughes retreated to his office, a space larger than most doctors enjoyed. The walls were adorned with photographs of him receiving awards, his father standing proudly beside him in some, and a couple of plaques highlighting his contributions to surgical techniques. He sank into his leather chair and stared at these reminders of his status, feeling uncharacteristically unsettled. The the director, had ripped away the comforting lie that he was simply a strict or demanding leader. She called his behavior exactly what it was, demeaning and detrimental. And somewhere, deep beneath his arrogance, Dr. Hughes felt the prick of conscience. He glanced at a framed portrait of his father, Dr. Marcus Hughes, a man remembered as a pioneering surgeon who nonetheless had a reputation for fairness and kindness with staff. People used to say, "Doctor." Marcus Hughes inspired loyalty because he showed respect to everyone, from the janitor to the chief of staff. A wave of shame coursed through Dr. Hughes, contrasting his father's leadership with his own. Could it be that he was tarnishing the family name more than upholding it? In the days that followed, the tension around Dr. Hughes's encounters with staff slowly evolved. He still barked orders, still seemed perpetually annoyed at minor inconveniences, but there were moments, fleeting though they were, where he reined himself in. Sometimes he'd start to snap and then visibly stop, as if remembering Tara's words. Nurses took note of these small changes. Some were skeptical, suspecting it wouldn't last. Others were quietly relieved that maybe, just maybe, they could do their jobs without walking on eggshells. Tara observed these shifts from the sidelines, making it a point to frequently visit the wards and speak with staff about their experiences. She invited small groups to informal gatherings in the break rooms, encouraging open dialogue about workplace challenges. Cecilia, the Filipino nurse, confided that Dr. Hughes had once humiliated her in front of a patient, scolding her for not handing him a surgical tool fast enough. Another nurse spoke about how Dr. Hughes's dismissiveness caused her to second-guess her instincts, leading her to delay reporting a critical symptom in one patient. Thankfully, it hadn't ended badly, but it could have. Tara took these accounts seriously, not to penalize Dr. Hughes further, but to understand exactly how damaging his behavior could be. She also saw the cracks in the broader system, the unwavering reverence for doctors, the rigid hierarchy that discouraged nurses or allied health professionals from challenging physician decisions. If she truly wanted a culture change, it wasn't enough to scold Dr. Hughes. The hospital needed systemic improvements. Before long, she met with the hospital's leadership team to propose a series of communication and cultural competency workshops. These sessions would be mandatory for all staff, from the newest lab tech to the most senior physician. Though some in the leadership worried about pushback, especially from certain egos in the medical staff, Tara insisted that a universal approach would prevent singling out any one individual while setting a clearer standard for everyone. The first workshop, held in a modest auditorium, focused on implicit bias and how it affected teamwork. A guest speaker, a clinical psychologist, took the stage, explaining how unconscious beliefs could shape the way we treat colleagues. Nurses, doctors, administrative staff, and technicians sat in rows, occasionally glancing around to see who was paying attention. Dr. Hughes entered late with an air of discomfort and took a seat in the back. He folded his arms across his chest, expression impassive. Tara watched discreetly, noting how some participants leaned forward in interest, while others seemed skeptical. The psychologist introduced interactive exercises, asking people to reflect on times they might have made assumptions about someone's competence based on their role, gender, or background. At first, Dr. Hughes didn't participate, but near the end of the workshop, he raised his hand stiffly. "What if you're dealing with a situation where time is critical?" he asked. "We don't always have the luxury to coddle staff who aren't performing." The psychologist acknowledged the concern. Emergency or not, effective communication saves time in the long run. If you foster an environment of trust, staff can give you vital information without hesitation, which could actually speed up decisions. Anger and fear often lead to mistakes. Dr. Hughes seemed unconvinced, but didn't press further. Tara considered it a small step that he even engaged in the Q&A. The second workshop focused on case studies of near misses, scenarios where poor communication almost led to patient harm. One example described a patient who needed immediate intubation, but a nurse felt intimidated about pointing out that the attending physician was missing a crucial piece of equipment. The short delay nearly cost the patient's life. As the story ended, participants split into small groups to discuss how they would handle similar situations. Dr. Hughes found himself in a group with 2 nurses and a physician assistant. Initially, he listened with arms folded, but as the others shared their views, something shifted in his posture. At one point, a nurse admitted she sometimes kept silent if a doctor barked at her for questioning a protocol. Dr. Hughes stared at the floor, perhaps envisioning how many times he'd done something similar. While these changes were happening, Tara continued her practice of dropping in on different wards. She talked not just to nurses, but also to pharmacists who were frustrated that doctors sometimes wrote illegible prescriptions or demanded medication changes without clarifying the reasons. She spoke to the housekeeping staff about the challenges they faced cleaning rooms quickly under pressure. In each conversation, she heard echoes of a common theme. The hospital ran on teamwork, yet certain pockets of arrogance could sabotage that teamwork. If Dr. Hughes's transformation took root, it might ripple outward, proving that no one was too important to be held accountable. As the weeks went by, Dr. Hughes occasionally lapsed into old habits, snapping at a nurse or rolling his eyes at an intern. But more often than not, he seemed to catch himself. A few staff members, noticing his small efforts, responded more openly. They began volunteering important updates without waiting to be asked or gently insisting, "Doctor Hughes, I think we should consider this angle." And to their surprise, he sometimes listened. One pivotal moment occurred in the post-operative ward. A patient named Mr. Anderson had come in for a routine laparoscopic gallbladder removal. Initially, everything seemed fine. But a few hours later, Mr. Anderson's blood pressure took a sudden dive, and he developed an intense, localized pain in his upper abdomen. A nurse on duty, noticing the changes, paged Dr. Hughes. He arrived appearing irritated as usual, but instead of demanding immediate sedation or ordering random tests, he asked the nurse for a detailed timeline. She explained that Mr. Anderson had first complained of a headache, then a rising fever, and only in the last hour had the severe abdominal pain flared. Dr. Hughes asked for her observations. She mentioned that Mr. Anderson had also become restless, like he couldn't find a comfortable position. Dr. Hughes paused, rubbed his chin, and asked if Mr. Anderson had mentioned shoulder pain. Sometimes referred pain could indicate a diaphragmatic issue or even internal bleeding. The nurse nodded. "Yes, actually, he said his right shoulder felt strange." Recognizing the sign, Dr. Hughes swiftly ordered imaging and discovered that Mr. Anderson had developed a post-surgical complication, a small bleed irritating the diaphragm, which in turn referred pain to the shoulder area. If left unchecked, it could have led to a full-blown crisis. But because Dr. Hughes had actually listened and pieced the puzzle together, they caught it in time. After the imaging confirmed the bleed, they intervened promptly, stabilizing the patient. Later, as the nurse was updating the chart, Dr. Hughes approached her. There was a stiffness to his manner, but he cleared his throat and said, "Good call on noticing those symptoms. That helped me make the right decision faster." Her eyes widened. She had never heard him praise anyone openly, much less a nurse. She stammered a quick thank you, trying to hide her disbelief. Word of this rare compliment spread quickly. Many viewed it as a clear sign that Dr. Hughes was altering his approach. Tara learned about the incident and felt a warmth in her chest. It wasn't a dramatic meltdown or some loud apology in the hallway, but the fact that he had acknowledged a nurse's contribution showed he was taking small steps forward. She continued to promote cross-departmental discussions, ensuring that everyone had a platform to voice concerns, while also pressing the administration to implement better protocols for conflict resolution. Months passed, and the hospital saw tangible improvements in its staff morale. Patient satisfaction ratings ticked upward, reflecting that the wards ran more smoothly. Nurses reported fewer high-stress altercations. A few even joked that Dr. Hughes was learning how to say please and thank you. It was hardly a complete transformation. On stressful days he could still bark commands, but he was undeniably more self-aware. During this period, Tara also focused on other departmental challenges. In the physical therapy unit, she discovered they were short-staffed, creating a backlog of patients needing rehabilitative sessions. She allocated additional resources to help them hire more personnel and coordinate better with the surgical teams for discharge planning. In the pharmacy department, she advocated for clearer e-prescribing systems to reduce confusion and the risk of errors. Every change she made reinforced the idea that no single role was more important than another. Everyone was part of a collective effort to provide exceptional care. Then one day, Dr. Hughes knocked on the door of Tara's modest office. It was a simple, functional space with a window that overlooked part of the hospital's rear parking lot. Pinned to a bulletin board behind her desk were notes on upcoming staff development workshops, doodles of new scheduling systems, and pictures from recent charity events. Tara was working through emails when she heard the knock. She glanced up, surprised to see him there, unannounced. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. For a moment it looked as if he might bolt. His shoulders were rigid, and his eyes carried an uncharacteristic humility. "Director Lawson," he said quietly, "I wanted to talk to you, privately." She gestured for him to take a seat. He settled into one of the chairs opposite her desk, fidgeting, as though unsure where to place his hands. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice subdued. "That day, when I found out who you really were, I handled it poorly. Actually, I've been handling a lot of things poorly for a while. I convinced myself that being harsh was the only way to maintain high standards. But I see now it's not. It was disrespectful and detrimental to the team." Tara listened calmly. Deep down, she felt a sense of relief and validation. She had hoped Dr. Hughes would come to this realization, but she hadn't been sure it would ever happen. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "I know change isn't easy, but you're making progress." He nodded, glancing at the small plaque on her desk that cited her contributions to nursing leadership. "I used to watch my father in the OR. He was strict but never cruel. Staff respected him because he acknowledged their importance. Somewhere along the line I lost sight of that. Maybe it was the pressure, or the environment, or my own ego, but I get it now. I see how much I need to rely on my team, not just give them orders." Tara leaned back, arms crossed gently over her torso. Apologies are a start. Continuing to treat people better is the real proof. The staff will watch your actions more than your words. He swallowed, the corners of his mouth twitching in a half-smile. Understood, he said. I want to do better. For myself, for the hospital, and for the patients. They spoke for a while longer, discussing additional workshops Tara had planned, including some smaller focus groups where staff could openly share concerns about communication styles. Dr. Hughes agreed to participate. Tara felt a renewed determination to see these changes through, and Dr. Hughes left her office looking slightly more at peace than when he'd arrived. By the time St. Vincent's unveiled its new outpatient surgery wing, the hospital had undergone a noticeable cultural shift. Morale was higher, staff turnover had dropped, and many employees felt a renewed sense of pride. The leadership decided to hold a ribbon-cutting ceremony in the hospital's courtyard, inviting local reporters, donors, city officials, and of course the staff who had worked hard to make it possible. Chairs were arranged on the lawn, a podium was set up, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Under a mild autumn sun, the CEO gave an opening speech about how the new wing symbolized progress and innovation. Then he introduced a few key individuals who had shown remarkable leadership in the past year. Tara's name was called, and she walked up to the podium feeling the eyes of hundreds of people on her. She wore professional attire, a small nod to her official role, yet her demeanor was the same calm, empathetic presence people recognized from her days in scrubs. She spoke about collaboration, about how true excellence in healthcare wasn't just the result of advanced technology or prestigious surgeons. It's the result of every single person who contributes, she said, her voice resonating through the microphone. From the cleaning staff that keeps our environment safe, to the pharmacists who ensure accurate medication dosing, to the nurses who spend countless hours at the bedside, to the doctors who perform life-saving procedures. At St. Vincent's, we've come to recognize that respect and unity aren't just buzzwords, they're the lifeblood that keeps our hospital strong. In the crowd, Tara spotted Dr. Hughes standing among several surgeons. He met her gaze and dipped his head slightly, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come since that heated confrontation. She offered him the faintest smile in return before concluding her speech. The audience applauded, enthusiastic, but also tinged with the knowledge of the internal changes that had taken place to get them here. Afterward, as people mingled with small cups of punch and finger foods, a junior nurse approached Tara. Her eyes shone with excitement and maybe a hint of nervousness. "I just wanted to say thank you," the nurse said, voice trembling slightly. "I've heard stories about how you stood up to Dr. Hughes. I'm new here, and it's such a relief to know there's someone looking out for us." Tara felt her heart warm at these words. "You're welcome," she replied gently. "But remember, everyone's voice matters. Keep speaking up about what you see and how things can improve. That's how we keep growing." Towards the end of the event, Dr. Hughes made a point to walk by Tara. He was accompanied by a few junior surgeons, presumably heading back to schedule post-ceremony consults. He paused briefly and offered her a small, almost shy wave. She waved back, fully aware that old habits were hard to break, but taking comfort in the fact that he was genuinely trying. The staff near them noticed the exchange, and one nurse smiled to herself, reflecting on how different this moment would have been just a few months ago. In the grand scheme of things, St. Vincent's Hospital remained a bustling place where not every day ran smoothly. Emergencies still caused chaos, equipment still malfunctioned, and interpersonal conflicts inevitably flared up. This was, after all, a microcosm of life. But the shift in culture that Tara had championed was unmistakable. Nurses felt more empowered to speak their minds. Doctors, many of whom were never as arrogant as Dr. Hughes, felt supported, and patients benefited from a more cohesive and attentive team. For Tara, the journey was far from over. She knew that institutional changes required ongoing effort. She planned to keep the communication workshops running, to mentor younger nurses in leadership skills, and to enforce rules against harassment or bullying. But as she walked through the newly opened outpatient surgery wing, sunlight streaming in through floor-to-ceiling windows, she felt a profound sense of hope. The ward was gleaming with fresh paint, new equipment, and bright signage. Yet the true transformation she cared about went beyond appearances. It was in the hearts and minds of those who worked there. "Yes, doctor." Hughes might still have the occasional outburst when things got overwhelming, but the difference was that now, if he crossed a line, staff would feel confident voicing their concerns. And more importantly, Dr. Hughes himself seemed to understand that his colleagues were not obstacles but allies. That alone was progress worth celebrating. In the end, the story of Tara Lawson and Dr. Samuel Hughes at St. Vincent's Hospital was never simply about a single blow-up or a single apology. It was about the ripple effects one person's courage could have on an entire system. By refusing to remain silent, Tara had unlocked a door that others had long assumed was sealed shut. Nurses who once hesitated to speak up for fear of reprisal now stepped forward. Technicians who felt overshadowed found renewed respect. Even some of the more aloof surgeons began to soften their stance when they saw how accountability, far from diminishing their authority, actually improved outcomes and morale. Life moved forward at St. Vincent's. Operations were performed, patients recovered, and staff moved on and off shifts in a perpetual dance of care. Through the glass walls of the new wing, rays of sunlight illuminated the corridors in a soft glow. Tara often walked those halls, greeting nurses, checking in with patients, and listening to concerns with an attentive ear. In those moments, she'd remember her own beginnings, the sirens in her childhood neighborhood, and her determination never to let adversity define her. Now she extended that spirit of determination to everyone around her, proving that a kinder, more collaborative environment was possible, even in a high-pressure world like medicine. As for Dr. Hughes, he discovered that relinquishing a measure of arrogance didn't strip him of his competence or authority. Instead, it allowed him to see the wealth of knowledge and insight offered by nurses, pharmacists, and allied health professionals. He began to appreciate that true leadership meant elevating those around you rather than pushing them down. Occasionally, he'd catch a glimpse of his father's portrait in the corridors, immortalized on a plaque for his contributions to the hospital's founding. In those moments, Dr. Hughes felt a small, quiet peace, knowing he was living up to the legacy in a way his father would have respected. And so the hospital marched onward with a steadier heartbeat, its people standing prouder, ready to face the challenges of tomorrow with a renewed sense of unity and compassion. In the city of Fairbridge, St. Vincent's was no longer just a place known for excellent surgeries. It was becoming a place known for its collective resilience and the simple yet transformative power of respect.